Hello and welcome back to part 4 of Getting an Organisation Started on AWS, a guide to the boring bits that no one wants to do. In this part we'll be going through Identity Center, Single Sign-On and AWS Directory Service. The goal of which is to have the platform in place to create new workforce users and grant them access to both the AWS console and third-party software, and then we'll be able to grant them a mailbox as well as a virtual desktop environment if we wanted to. So let's get started with some theory on Identity Center and Directory Service. AWS Identity Center, formerly known as AWS SSO, allows us to centrally manage access to 0 or more AWS accounts, as well as AWS applications and external SAML-enabled applications, all through a single sign-on portal. These users are stored in one of 3 different types of identity stores, either the built-in Identity Center store, a AWS Managed Microsoft Active Directory, so that's a directory from Directory Service, or an external provider such as an on-premise Microsoft AD, Azure AD, G Suite by Google, Jump Cloud, Okta, 1Password, etc. It's worth noting that these users are not IAM users. These users are created just in those stores, and then AWS uses the credentials from there and swaps those out for short-lived AWS credentials behind the scenes. AWS recommends that any workforce-style identity federation uses AWS Identity Center. As you can see from that image on the right, that is a single sign-on portal after you've signed in. You can see the AWS accounts that user has access to, and they can click through those and access that account through whichever permission set or sets they have been granted. They can also access whichever third-party SAML-enabled apps have been configured for Identity Center, such as Dropbox, Office 365, or Slack. AWS Directory Service allows for a managed Active Directory that we can use for services such as Workmail or Workspaces, and we could even, depending on the type we use it for things such as Amazon AWS RDS, which is a relational database service, or other Microsoft products. But it all depends on the directory we use, and that comes in 4 different modes. We have Simple AD, which is by far the cheapest, and is a standalone managed directory that is powered by a Linux Samba Active Directory compatible server. We have AWS Manage Microsoft AD, which is a full-blown Microsoft AD managed in the AWS cloud by AWS. You have an AD connector, which is just a proxy for redirecting requests to an external AD. So you'd use this to integrate with an external AD and bring those users in. Or you have a cognito user pool, which is more for providing sign-up and sign-in access to applications and websites, and isn't really used so much for workforce-style federation. AWS Directory Service provides multiple ways to use Microsoft Active Directory with other AWS services. So there's 3 options here, so we discount the cognito user pool. There's, as I said before, there's a AWS managed full-fat Microsoft Active Directory, which is feature-rich and is hosted on the AWS cloud. It's the best choice if you have more than 5,000 users and you a trust relationship set up between AWS hosted directory and the on-premise directory you have. AD connector simply connects existing on-prem ADs to AWS, so it's the best choice when you want to use your existing AD. And then Simple AD is the cheapest, great for when you have a few users and you don't need all the full-fat features of AD, and it's going to be what we're using for this course. So let's recap how that works architecturally then. We have Identity Center, which lives within the management account normally. You can delegate that to a different account if you want, but that's where Identity Center lives. And at this point we have 3 options. We can either use a AWS Managed Microsoft AD, either within the same account or in a different account. We can use the built-in store, which is not a store in Directory Service, but a store just for Identity Center, which will live in the same account as Identity Center. And then you have a external identity provider, so that could be Jump Cloud or G Suite or your own on-premise solution. But this is where you store users for Identity Center. Through Identity Center, we can grant access to 0 or more AWS accounts, either no AWS accounts, or just this one, or just that one, or both. And we can also provide those same users through that portal access to third-party SAML-enabled applications like Salesforce, Dropbox, Office, Slack. And then you have Directive Service, which is a store of users, a directory of users, which we can use to power things such as Workmail and Workspaces. We could use AWS Manage Microsoft Ad, in which case Workspaces and Workmail will use the same directory as Identity Center. Or we can use a simple AD here, or a different, or like an AD connector or something, some other directory service to provide access to Workmail or Workspaces. So these can be different, the ones used for Workspaces and Workmail and the ones used for Identity Center. So if you look here, for example, we have simple AD, which is used to power Workspaces and Workmail, but is not used to power Identity Center. Identity Center can still use either the built-in store or external store to grant access to third-party SAML-enabled applications. You can, if you wanted to, use an external Active Directory, like Azure's Active Directory, use an AD connector to pull that through and use that external Active Directory hosted in Azure or on-premises to power Workspaces and Workmail, and therefore also power Identity Center to grant access to Slack, Office and other apps. I'd say for real-world scenarios, this is probably close to ideal, because that way you'd manage your Active Directory outside of AWS with whatever tooling you need. You can manage that in Azure and then just integrate up and manage all this here. However, if you want to keep costs down and you want to limit the amount of platforms you have to manage, let's say you just want to manage on AWS, then you can do what we're doing in this course, which is have two different directories again, a simple AD to manage Workspaces and Workmail, and then Identity Center's built-in store to federate access to AWS accounts as well as third-party software. This is the option you want if you want to keep costs at an absolute minimum and still provide all this great stuff. This architecture can evolve, so you can start off on simple AD and then move to a Microsoft managed Active Directory, and then you can also migrate this outside entirely and use an external AD if you wanted. But this is a great way to get started quickly and for cheap. So that was enough theory. Hopefully that makes sense, but if not, stick around, we'll do a walkthrough and we'll set up Identity Center with the built-in store. We will then grant access to third-party software packages, create some users with the correct permission sets in Identity Center, and then we'll get started with creating a directory in Directory Service ready for the next set of sections. So hope you've had fun, stick around, and let's do this. Okay, so let's get started with the walkthrough for part 4 of this course. We'll start off in the management account logged in as the root user. Here I will demonstrate how to properly use IAM Identity Center. You may have already had a sneak peek at this previously in my course, one in the multi-account video and also in the domains video, but I'm going to assume you've not seen it before. So there's two ways to get to Identity Center, either searching it in the search bar and going through it directly, or going there through Control Tower. So head over to IAM Identity Center, and from here you can see an access portal at the bottom right corner. You can change that if you wish. Once changed, you can't change that back, and it has to be globally unique. So once you do click into there, you will see a sign-in screen. So I'm already signed in, so I'm going to sign out of that. Okay, a sign-in screen. So it's worth noting that these users in Identity Center aren't the same as IAM users, although they can be used as IAM users. The users are stored in the identity source that Identity Center is configured to use, so either the built-in store or Active Directory. And if you go back to Identity Center and click choose your identity source, you can see the options there. So how that works is AWS swaps the credentials from this store for temporary AWS credentials behind the scenes. So if you go into there and change identity source, yep, you can see Identity Center directory is chosen by default, and that's what we're going to leave it as. You also have Active Directory, an external identity provider. So we're going to leave it as Identity Center directory and close out of there. So what we can do now is go from settings and go over to permission sets. What we're going to do is we're going to create 2 permission sets, and these are permission sets that are going to be used by users. So for example, we can create a administrator access permission set to give to administrator users. So we can select that there from the predefined list. And then we have the option to specify the session duration, so how long they can be logged in for, let's say 4 hours for that. We can then go ahead and press next, and that creates that permission set. So now we can create a second one for users who only need to see like billing information. So for example, finance users or whomever in the business needs to look at that, but people who don't need to make real technical changes. So again, create that billing permission set. Okay, so now that we've created our billing and our administrator access permission sets, we can go and create some users. So we'll go to users in Identity Center and add a user. So we're going to create a billing user. So let's say Sarah Billington, and we're going to generate a one-time password which will let us copy that password at the end. Now we've not set up any proper emails yet on our domain name, so I'll just use aliases on top of my email address. So you can do this for yours. We'll create proper email addresses later and have a proper process for setting up a user with our email address, but for now I'm just going through this. So I fill those details in. We can add other details such as address information, contact details, time zone preferences, but we don't need to do any of that. So we can go ahead and press next. Okay, so we want to create a group for this user. We're going to create a billing group. So all billing users who have access to like see costs and billing reports will use this group, and they'll only be able to access billing information, nothing else such as EC2 or any like organization stuff. So created that group, billing, nice simple group. Now we can go back to the user create journey, refresh that and see the billing groups there. Select that, click next to add it to the user, and now that user's on that group and we can select that one-time password. Okay, we can now see that user in the user list. So now we can give them access to all the AWS accounts. So go to AWS accounts on the left and select the accounts you want this group, which has our user, to have access to. So I'm going to select all of them. I can click them, yep, all of them, and assign users or groups. Change that to groups at the top and click our newly created billing group. Press next, and then we want that billing permission set that we created at the beginning. So click that, next, submit, and that's going to create the permissions across accounts for users of that group to access. So now that's done, go back to the dashboard. Okay, and then we can open our access portal. Okay, so now what we can do is we can go to the access portal URL. So this will log you out of your current session, so feel free to open this in another browser or incognito tab, but I'm not bothered. So go to here and it's going to prompt us to sign in. And it loads. Okay, so we're going to want to sign in with the Sarah Billington user we just created with her very creative last name, and then paste that password that was copied from the one-time password pop-up. Paste that in, sign in, and it's going to force you to reset your password. So choose a strong password, reset that, and that should log you in. So here now we have the single sign-on portal. We can see the accounts we selected, and we can log in with the billing permission set or the billing role group. So that'll sign us in. Okay, so now as you can see in the top right, we're in as Sarah Billington, and we can access billing. and see my costs I've racked up. And you can also go to something like EC2 and show that it doesn't work because you haven't got the correct permissions. So that's it for this user. So sign out. I'm going to go back to the main AWS portal and sign back in with my management user. So aws.amazon.com. Okay, so I've logged back in as the root user on the management account. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to going back to Aws Identity Center, and I'm going to show you how to add a third-party business application such as Slack. In my case, I'll be using Slack, but you could also use Office or Dropbox, or any other third-party SAML-enabled app. So you're going to go to Applications, and I have got Slack Business Plus, which you need as a minimum to configure Slack with SSO. But on Applications, choose Slack or whatever your app is. Click Next and you'll see the metadata and details for that. So each application has its own unique requirements of how to add SSO. So I'm following the guide for Slack. I'm not going to go through too much detail on the actual process for how Slack works with SSO. But essentially you provide the data from Identity Center up to the SAML configuration of the third-party app. And then you'll have to specify data from the third-party app into Aws Identity Center. So what you can see is I've configured the SSO URL, so sign-in URL and the issuer URL from Identity Center into Slack. I have saved that configuration, and now what I'm going to do is I am going to add ACS URL and the SAML audience, which I put it in the wrong boxes. I'll move those down, but it's basically slack.com and then the workspace URL for your Slack. Submit that, and now you can go and assign some users to that application. So you want to assign users, and now that you can see that it tells us that users you created here won't auto create in Slack or the other app because we haven't got just-in-time provisioning enabled, which we can't enable with the simple Identity Center directory. So what we do now is we would invite our user from Slack to join. The issue with this here is I've used aliases, so it's like inviting a user that already exists, but for an actual new email, you'd invite them, they'd accept through their email, and then as long as they're also created in Identity Center, you have that back and forth between single sign-on from Identity Center to Slack. And as you can see here, it says the user already exists, but obviously if it was a distinct email, it wouldn't, so you'd sign up. So you can see here that the users group billing, if you go into users groups and then assign users, you can see that Slack already has the billing group assigned. So if we go back to our dashboard now and we open our single sign-on portal URL, so go to the bottom right corner of the dashboard and click that link. But okay, so it's going to ask us to sign in, so we can sign in with that Sarah Billington user. Put in the password as usual. And now you can see you have both the AWS accounts and Slack. Clicking Slack will sign us in and redirect to the Slack workspace. So again, it doesn't quite work seamlessly here because we already have that sort of duplicate user, that circular user. But in a proper user process, you'd be able to click through that link and it'd go straight to the Slack homepage. So one other thing we want to do is make sure our user's email is verified. So from users, going to the Sarah Billington user and verify that email. There should be a link in the mailbox. Once you've done that, what we're going to do is add MFA to our users added through Identity Center. So go to Settings and then Multi-Factor Auth and Configure. And what we can do is we can specify the options for MFA. So we can say, hey, every time they sign in, prompt for MFA code, allow authenticator apps only, and require them to, we could say allow them to sign in and then allow them to manage their own MFA devices, which means when they sign in, they'll sign in fine first time, add their MFA device, or shall I say PIN, and then it'll prompt each time. So if we sign out of the SSO link, and we can sign back in with any user, but what I'm going to sign in with, I think, is I'll sign in with the admin user I created earlier when I set up Control Tower. Control Tower set this up for us, so I'll log in with that. It doesn't really matter which user you log in with. Paste the password in, and then sign in. Okay, so what we can see is MFA devices at the top. So register your device, and then you're going to want your authenticator app. Same as previously, you want to show the secret key, add it to your MFA device, and then get your MFA code. Okay, so once you've done that, paste that PIN in, and then you can press done. So what's going to happen now, so if it's a load, okay, you can see that device is registered. So if we sign out of there, then what we're going to do is sign back in with the same user. Obviously just for good measure really, MFA. It's good to have extra layers of security for your users, especially if you have access to a lot of great stuff. So you can see now it's prompting for an MFA code. So get it from your app, paste that in, and then great. We can see the AWS accounts here. No Slack, because we've not added it to this user group, remember. This user is not in a group and this user does not have that access, but you can see we can log into these accounts without issue as a federated user. Now, what I would recommend if you want to give your workforce users Microsoft Office and like an Exchange email, then I would recommend getting Azure Active Directory and Office and using the Azure Active Directory as the identity source for Identity Center. You can then add Office as an application to Identity Center and manage access through Active Directory on Azure, and then you'll get all those benefits and you can leave it there. However, in this course, we're going to be keeping it cheap, going to be keeping it on the AWS platform, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be giving our users Workspaces, Amazon Workspaces, and email addresses through Amazon Workmail. So we're going to be carrying on with built-in directory. We're going to now create a directory in the directories account for those users for giving Workmail and Workspaces. So first off, we're going to want to create a user. You can access our directories account and create a directory. So we're currently logged in as a management user. So let's go to Identity Center and then go to, well, we can look at the users we have. Add a user, but we really need to add a group. So let's go to groups, create a group, and we can call this group power users. So this is senior IT staff who can do IT operations, but they can't manage users membership. So let's say senior IT members. Yep, okay, let's create that group. So now we can create a user and bind them to that group. So let's call this guy John Doe. Okay, so we're going to want a one-time password we can copy. That's using, again, yet another email alias for this guy. Okay, copy that in. John Doe. Okay, so this is going to fail because the username has a space in it, as you can see. We go next. Yep, that doesn't work. So we just need to go and edit that guy. Go back. Okay, John Doe, all one word. Now this should go through fine as green. So next. Retry add user. Okay, and we can copy those details so we can log in with that guy later. Okay, so now we need to add the permission set for power users to that. And we don't do it here, do we? No. We need to add permission sets to that group. So we can go to groups.
AWS accounts. Okay, so now we can select the account or accounts that the user can belong to. So let's say directories, since we want to go into the directories account to create our directory. Assign the users or groups and select that power user group from groups up there. Okay, and then click next. Now here we can choose a permission set. So let's say power user access. Yep. Next. And and submit that. So this is now going to create that user and give them power user access to the directories accounts. So at this point now we can go back to our dashboard and go to our portal URL and log in with John Doe. So just sign out there if you're already signed in like I am. Okay, so John Doe. Paste that password you copied, and then you can reset the password. So make sure to set a strong password here. Okay. So we can see the one account. We could add an MFA device if we want to, but we don't need to do that now. But we can see we have that directories account. So with power user access, which is what we want, we can go and log into there.
Okay, so we've logged back into the directories account with the John Doe user who has power access. Now what we want to do is we want to start creating workspaces and Workmail. For that we will need a directory. The directory will also need outbound internet access from the VPC. If you'll remember, when we created this account, we created it with a private VPC only, so no NAT gateway. That was to save on costs. Directory Service and the NAT gateway and Workspaces will all incur some charges. So what we'll do in the next part of the video, we'll set up Workspaces and a directory and the necessary VPC configuration for that, which at that point will start incurring charges. So that's it for this video. Hope you've enjoyed, and I will see you in the next.